Good morning. It's Thursday the 15th of March and you're watching Thames Television from London. We've come to the end of our nighttime entertainment now. With the time coming up to 5 o'clock, we now hand over to the studios of ITN for the morning news.
Fire at Libyan chemicals plant, they say it could be sabotage. Good morning, it's 5 o'clock on Thursday the 15th of March and this is the early morning news from ITN. The headlines. Washington has denied any involvement in a fire at a chemicals plant in Libya, but a news agency in Tripoli says sabotage can't be ruled out. 2 men have been arrested in Kenya in connection with the murder of the British woman Julie Ward. And Mr. Gorbachev is on the brink of unprecedented political power in the Soviet Union, although his critics have accused him of steamroller tactics. Later in the programme, the Eastern Bloc country where the government says there's no repression, yet people are arrested for criticising the bread, a report in our world news. And from American television, warnings of a devastating earthquake in California. But first, the main stories. The Americans have denied any involvement with a fire which damaged a Libyan chemicals plant. The Libyans say the factory may have been sabotaged by the US or the Israelis. The factory is in Rabta, 50 miles south of the capital. The State Department in Washington say the plant was being used to make chemical weapons.
President Bush said the United States had absolutely not been involved in the fire at the Libyan plant, which he has long claimed is being used to make deadly chemical weapons. Only last week the White House repeated that charge, saying that weapons production had recently resumed and refusing to rule out military action to destroy it. There was no immediate evidence to show whether yesterday's massive fire at the Rabta plant was the result of an accident or sabotage, but the facility has a history of breakdowns. The most serious was in 1988, when production came to a halt shortly after the United States first charged that mustard gas and nerve gas were being produced there. Ironically, no American spy satellite was in a position to find out what was going on, and with their fleet of Blackbird spy planes mothballed by budget cuts, the US was forced to rely on ground-based intelligence for information. Colonel Gaddafi has always insisted the plant makes only pharmaceuticals. Few believe this, and the notion of the eccentric Libyan leader passing out chemical weapons to terrorists had caused widespread alarm. Despite those White House denials, a Libyan government spokesman said that the fire, which had completely destroyed the factory, was in fact the work of the Americans, or failing that, the Israelis. Whatever the cause, it now seems that Colonel Gaddafi's chemical weapons production program has received a major setback.
2 new polls give little comfort to the government, already shaken by poll tax protests. One poll gives Labour their biggest lead for nearly 20 years. The latest findings come after the Tories' first defeat in the Commons since the last election.
With the government already on the defensive over the poll tax, the events of the past few days have brought more trouble. On Tuesday night, the Tories suffered their first Commons defeat since the last general election.
253.
Labour says the government is visibly disintegrating.
Backbenchers were openly arguing with cabinet ministers on the floor of the House of Commons in between the votes. Scenes of a government which is in absolute disarray, in absolute turmoil. A government which I believe is in a near-to-terminal state. All the signs are there, and it would be quite astonishing and historically unprecedented if they were able to recover.
With senior Tory politicians campaigning in mid-Staffordshire, the by-election just a week away, 2 new polls have further damaged Conservative hopes of retaining the seat. One of the polls gives Labour nationally its biggest lead for nearly 20 years, with the Conservatives at 31% and Labour 21 points ahead on 52%. And a poll in this morning's Daily Mail, concentrating on the mid-Staffordshire constituency, has Labour in what it describes as a shock lead. Campaigning in the seat last night, Michael Heseltine tried to calm jitters.
Government is not easy. It is a lonely place to be. You only get the difficult decision. Nor is it a process where everything always goes right. Sometimes things go wrong.
Despite the calls by senior ministers for calm, there's no disguising Tory fears that this could be more than just short-term unpopularity.
The Soviet Parliament has begun voting on whether to give President Gorbachev the extra powers he says he needs to steer the country out of social and economic chaos. His critics have accused him of using steamroller tactics to force the measures through Parliament. Some said he had brought the country to the brink of collapse, comparing his style to a driver putting his foot on the brake and the accelerator at the same time. 2 game park wardens have been arrested in Kenya following an investigation by Scotland Yard detectives into the murder of the British woman Julie Ward. They were invited to take over the inquiry by Kenya's president. Police believe Miss Ward was held captive for some days before being killed during her visit to the Masai Mara Game Reserve. She disappeared in September 1988 while on safari. At first it was claimed she'd been eaten by wild animals. Her father John held a long campaign to prove the truth about his daughter's death. The quick thinking of a London tube driver stopped a collision involving 800 passengers. The train went the wrong way on the track during the rush hour. The driver of another train saw it coming towards him, but managed to short-circuit the power supply. London Underground say it happened because of a problem in the signalling system.
It was in this stretch of tunnel in Monday evening's rush hour that a major underground disaster so nearly happened. The incident took place on the Piccadilly line at King's Cross. A train heading west was ordered to turn back to its starting point at Cockfosters. The passengers left. The driver should have continued west to the next set of points and then back eastwards. Instead, he walked along to the cab at the other end of a train and drove back up the same line. The driver of another westbound train waiting in the tunnel suddenly saw the headlights of the first train coming towards him. He reached out to the wiring on the tunnel walls and pulled 2 wires together, causing a short circuit to cut the power supply. The approaching train stopped just 400 feet from him and his 800 passengers.
I spoke on the radio to the control saying that I'd discharged the current because the train was coming towards me. And obviously the passengers, I think, in the first car must have heard this because the next thing I heard was a door slamming between the carriages, and I looked back and the first car was empty. They'd all scarpered. Well, I can't blame them.
A similar incident happened 2 years ago, producing a recommendation that red lights should be installed to prevent drivers going the wrong way.
We did not implement that through to a conclusion. That was a fault on our part. We accept that.
Within a week, red lights will be installed at 50 locations. The driver who went the wrong way has been suspended.
We take a break now, then the ITN World News, which includes a special report from inside Albania. That's in a couple of minutes.
The Milka cow is very special. She lives up in the Alps. There she is. The air she breathes is as pure and clean because it's mountain air. She eats the fresh green grass and drinks water from the clear mountain streams. It's no wonder she produces smooth, delicious milk. Milk that makes Milka chocolate so tender and tempting. Heidi loves the taste, but even she doesn't know why the Milka cow is lilac. Why is the cow lilac?
As larder dealers, we've got together to bring you an amazing drive-away deal. For only £3,333, drive away this superb 1300 Riva Select. Or for just £4,444, this stylish Samara 1300 Select.
That's on the road.
It's an unrepeatable offer from every larder dealer. So call in today or you'll miss out.
One more time. Where were you on the night of the crime?
I told you, I was on the phone most of the night talking to 8 different people. It's a party line. You call up and you say whatever you want.
You expect us to believe that... But you can have your own party on the phone?
Yeah, and so can you guys.
All right, let's take him back to the cell. But before you go, you're entitled to 1 phone call.
Hello? Who's on the line?
You two can join the party. Dial 0898 223 666 now.
Hey, can you guys keep it down? I'm on the phone in here.
Surf Automatic has the cleaning power to remove really stubborn dirt and stains at low temperatures. To leave your clothes really fresh. So, for outstanding low temperature cleaning, get Surf Automatic in powder and liquid. Get surfing.
You won't catch me using a spot cream, because this is invisible. It works too. Nuclear aerosol gel. Unspottable.
Welcome back. It's 5:10. Now the ITN World News. This was first seen by viewers overseas last night.
Hello, I'm Brenda Rowe with the ITN World News. We'll bring you the international news and a business report, the top stories. Gorbachev takes a step closer to becoming executive president. Poland to join six-power talks on German reunification. Iraq's leader unrepentant on journalist death sentence. First, the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev is a step closer to becoming the country's first powerful executive president. The Soviet Parliament, or Congress of People's Deputies, backed his plan that it, and not a national ballot, should elect the new-style president. Supporters of Mr. Gorbachev warned that the political and economic crisis in the country was too serious to be delayed by a general election. But the final vote in favour of Parliament electing the president was close. 1,542 in favour, 368 against, and 76 abstentions. That was only 45 votes more than the two-thirds majority Mr. Gorbachev needed for the measure to become law. Later, Mr. Gorbachev was left as the only presidential candidate when the Prime Minister Nikolai Ryzhkov and the Interior Minister Vadim Bakitin withdrew from the race.
Day 3 of the Congress of People's Deputies and signs that the Soviet leader's patience was wearing thin. He'd hoped introducing the new office of president would be a swift matter, but the process got bogged down by arguments from deputies wary of so much power in the hands of one man. They'd already won some concessions on martial law and the use of emergency powers. Today, though, as they pressed for the new president to be elected by the people and not Congress, Gorbachev accused them of deliberately holding up the process. Then allies rallied around him.
Надо принять во внимание и то, товарищи, что всенародное голосование будет гораздо демократичнее при многопартийной системе. А пока, по моему глубокому убеждению, логика перестройки торопит, подталкивает нас. В сущности, борьба между силами, твердо стоящими на позициях перестройки, и антисилами вошла в решающую фазу. Она далеко не окончена.
In the end, 3 names were put forward for the presidency, but 2 withdrew, leaving the way clear for Mr. Gorbachev, who significantly was nominated by the party's Central Committee.
The ruling Communist Party in Mongolia has elected a reformist as its new leader and also ended its 66-year-old monopoly of power. The party's Central Committee chose Gombo Javin Ochiabat as its new General Secretary. Earlier, it had accepted the resignation of the entire Politburo. The Mongolian Communist Party has ruled the Central Asian state since 1924. It's been under increasing pressure since the beginning of the year when new opposition movements began staging a series of popular rallies and demonstrations. West Germany has announced that Poland will be included in the so-called 2+4 talks when the issue of its border with a united Germany is discussed at international negotiations in Bonn. The promise was made at the first negotiating session of the 4 World War II allies and German delegations at the Bonn meeting. Poland has expressed concern that a reunified Germany might want to reclaim territory which became part of Poland after the war.
The 2 sat down together with the 4 for the first time today. Admittedly, there were high-ranking civil servants from the various foreign ministries here to discuss procedural matters before the politicians took over, but it was still a piece of history in the making. The 2 parts of Germany and the victorious wartime allies were now meeting as equals. The West German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher met the delegation heads. Yesterday he'd shifted his government's policy in conceding that Poland could join in the talks later when its borders were discussed. But it's the question of military alliances which will give the 2+4 participants the most difficulty, in particular of how a new united Germany can stay part of NATO in face of opposition from the Soviet Union. At present, the 2 parts of Germany bristle with military bases. In the disarmament process following the transformation of Europe, the Soviet Union wants guarantees built in about its security. The presence of nearly 400,000 Soviet troops in East Germany is another difficult area. Their numbers will be cut, but there'll still be many of them on German soil when the country's unified, creating problems about their status and about their exact function.
In the longer term, after unification and the conclusion of disarmament talks, the German people will face calls for neutrality from left-wing and green parties inside the country. But it looks at present as if those views will stay in the minority.
In Berlin.
The talks ended with a statement confirming that Poland would be invited to join in when the border issues were raised, and setting the date of the next meeting after a new government has been formed in East Germany. Today's formal launching of the 2+4 process is helping to concentrate minds on the timetable for German unification. After the early wild optimism which spoke of the two Germanys becoming one by the end of this year, more and more politicians here are now saying that with complex external and internal problems still to be resolved, it's all going to take a great deal longer. Gabby Rado, ITN, Bonn.
The East German Conservative leader Wolfgang Schnurr has resigned after admitting he was an informer for the country's now dismantled security police. The resignation of Herr Schnurr came just 4 days before the democratic elections in East Germany and is a blow for the Conservative alliance backed by West Germany's Chancellor Kohl. Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir has reaffirmed his commitment to keep a united Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. The national coalition government of Likud and the left-of-centre Labour Party crumbled this week when Mr. Shamir fired Labour Party leader Shimon Peres. Other Labour Party members of the cabinet then resigned. The statement on Jerusalem comes as Mr. Shamir's right-wing Likud Bloc tries to win support from Israel's small religious parties ahead of a no-confidence vote scheduled for Thursday. The dispute centres on the refusal of the Likud Bloc to agree to American peace proposals designed to lead to direct talks between the Israelis and Palestinians, including some from East Jerusalem and others deported by the Israelis for alleged membership in the PLO. President Saddam Hussein, in his first public comment on Iraq's death sentence on a London-based journalist, has said that Baghdad is not afraid of British displeasure. Mr. Bazoft, an Iranian-born reporter, was on a reporting assignment in Iraq when he was arrested and sentenced to death for allegedly spying for Israel. The British government is trying to win the release of both Mr. Bazoft and the British nurse Daphne Parish, who's been sentenced to 15 years in prison for allegedly helping Mr. Bazoft.
News that the Foreign Secretary would not be a welcome visitor to Baghdad came as the Iraqi embassy in London received a new delegation calling for a lifting of the death sentence on Farzad Bazoft. Media trades unionists and human rights activists mounted a picket outside while a representative was received by the ambassador. A statement from the embassy described Mr. Hurd's proposed visit to Baghdad as rather inconvenient. The visit could be seen as part of the current media campaign intended to bring pressure on the Iraqi government. Iraq's President Hussein has a reputation for stubbornness in the face of outside efforts to influence him. He said he couldn't decide to intervene while under political and media pressure. Back off and I'll see seemed to be his message, but British officials in Iraq are still pressing for two things.
A reply to the Prime Minister's letter and consular access. But no way are we going to let up, of course.
The editor of The Observer, for whom Farzad Bazoft worked, thinks it's time to cool the media campaign.
We don't want to put more pressure than is necessary on Baghdad. They know what we think. They know what the world thinks now, and we have to allow them time to decide what they think is right.
The National Democratic Congress Party on the Caribbean island of Grenada is trying to form a coalition government with other centrist parties after an inconclusive election. Nicholas Brathwaite, who led the interim government following the US invasion of the island in 1983, has emerged as the most likely winner. He's trying to persuade at least one other legislator in the 15-seat parliament to join him in forming a government. The flamboyant former Prime Minister, Sir Eric Gairy, failed in his attempt to make a political comeback and lost his seat. The elections were the second on Grenada since the Marxist government was overthrown by the American invasion.
When 7,000 US troops invaded this tiny island in 1983, they promised to stamp out Marxism. They succeeded. They also promised economic prosperity. However, although America has spent more than $100 million on Grenada, this year's aid is expected to dwindle to only $6 million. With unemployment running at 29%, the economy was high on the agenda for Grenada's voters. They backed moderation, but failed to elect an outright winner. Negotiations started immediately to form a coalition. Unlike its neighbours, the Spice Island has not capitalised on its most beguiling attractions. Most of the souvenirs sold in the shops are from Taiwan or Hong Kong. The winner, Nicholas Brathwaite, who led the interim government following the American intervention, led his campaign on tourism. He promised to boost the island's ailing leisure industry with a massive hotel building programme. The election result is definitely a rebuff for the eccentric Sir Eric Gairy, who dominated Grenada's political scene for 2 decades, before being overthrown by the Marxist coup in '79. Sir Eric's party won 4 seats, but, despite claims that his campaign was divinely inspired, he himself failed to win a seat. Cuba is the only Caribbean nation that continues to preoccupy America. Therefore, Grenada will have to go it alone to rebuild its stagnant economy.
One of the stars of the old Hollywood swashbuckling movies has come out of retirement to give a modern star a few tips. Sir Douglas Fairbanks Jr., now in his 80s, made more than 80 films, including The Prisoner of Zenda, in which he played one of the 2 leading roles. The old buccaneer made a special trip to London to show the British actor Paul Nicholas the debonair way to cut a dash.
As publicity stunts go, this wasn't a bad one. Ask the oldest swashbuckler in show business to teach your new star. Though Sir Douglas had to admit he's never really known what swashbuckling actually meant.
I've often wondered, I've looked it up in various dictionaries. First you have to work out what a buckle is, and then you have to know how to swash it, I suppose. There's no real satisfactory answer that I have seen. It goes back, it's an old term going back to the 17th, 16th century.
Could you swing from a rope again and attack a villain to save a heroine?
I'll say yes, so long as you don't ask me to do it.
It was almost the classic scene for a duel. 2 men with their swords alone on a green, or almost so. At 81, Sir Douglas is a wonderful advertisement for a life spent swinging from chandeliers, a perfect model for aspiring buccaneers, though he had to confess to a touch of rheumatism when asked to cock his arm in the fencer's classic pose. So, after his lesson, what qualities did Paul Nicholas think a successful swashbuckler needed?
I think immense charm, immense athletic ability, and a desire to make a lot of money.
In the duel for the media's attention today, the old star had clearly kept a few secrets to himself. David Rose, ITN, South London.
Now business news. A group of 3 Japanese companies led by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is reportedly planning to invest about $800 million in the development of Boeing's proposed new 777 jet. A leading newspaper in Japan said the 3 companies, which include Kawasaki and Fuji, will tell Boeing whether they are going to participate in the project before the end of March. British Aerospace, one of Britain's biggest defence contractors, has reported a profit increase of 29% for 1989. The increase came to $536 million. The company also announced that it was looking for future link-ups with other aerospace companies in Europe. Banks throughout Brazil have closed for 3 days to dampen down business speculation before an emergency economic package is announced by the country's new leader. President Fernando Collor de Mello is expected to implement a new wages policy and higher taxes to tackle hyperinflation and huge government debts. The European prices on Wednesday evening. Gold bullion closed in London up $2.25 an ounce. North Sea Brent blend oil fell 20 cents a barrel. The FT 100 index in London closed up 1.6. And on the Frankfurt Bourse, the FAS index rose 5.35. Now for our special report, in which we take a longer look at one of the stories making the news. The United Nations Secretary-General Javier Pérez de Cuellar has announced he will visit Albania in mid-May. Albania is one of the last bastions of hardline communism and so far has resisted the extensive democratic changes sweeping Eastern Europe. However, earlier this week, the government passed a law giving voters a greater say over members of parliament. Ethnic tensions are widely recognized to be the country's greatest source of potential unrest. And the foreign minister has said that ethnic confrontation must be avoided at all costs. Hundreds of demonstrators were arrested 2 months ago during unrest in the town of Shkodera and the capital Tirana. Despite denials by the government, there are persistent reports of major political and economic problems.
These are the pictures Albanians encourage visitors to take. The women workers from the 9th of November Medical Centre marking International Women's Day with a collective celebration in a country where there's little scope for private entertainment. Busloads of happy workers seem to follow tourists everywhere in Albania. These are the pictures Albanians don't want you to see. Beggars, hundreds of them in the People's Socialist Republic, where children openly ask foreigners for food. Shops where cigarettes are sold individually and the shelves are empty of fresh dairy produce. Meat is supposedly rationed to 1 kilo per person a week, but the butcher's always closed. Every apartment block is adorned with praise for the party and its achievements, but behind the banners there's a 2-roomed apartment with no toilet, with a sink and a stove on an outside balcony for a family of 5. Across the road, a well-built block for the party elite and their families, with a soldier on constant guard duty. Only party leaders have access to the imported Mercedes and BMWs. The people aren't allowed private cars. After dropping children at state creches and schools, people walk and cycle for miles to get to work. Some to factories where machines based on pre-war technology are unable to supply the needs of the people, and workers have no hope of competing with the outside world. Reforms are being introduced. There will be multi-candidate elections from the shop floor up to party officials. Where once even travel between villages was restricted, peasants are now allowed into the towns to sell their goods privately. But Albania remains the poorest and most repressed country in Europe, with the government refusing to consider radical change. Now young people are protesting in the capital Tirana and here in the once Catholic north Shkodra. 5 years ago, protests here saw hundreds of families interned in concentration camps. When people heard the news from Romania, they demonstrated again, under the statue of the man still officially revered in Albania.
In private, people tell you that several thousand young people met here beneath the statue of Stalin and demanded the overthrow of the Albanian government. Officially, the Albanian government say no demonstrations have taken place in Albania.
Over 100 people are still in prison, accused of organizing the protest, and the rest live in fear of arrest. People can't speak openly here, but out of sight of the secret police in narrow streets behind closed doors, they tell the story for the first time.
They would kill us if they caught us talking to you. We're not allowed to talk to foreigners. Of course there was a demonstration. 3,000 of us. They arrested 400. Our leaders are much, much worse than Ceausescu.
We demonstrated for a new government that believes in human rights. But even today, people are still being arrested for demonstrating. The newspapers and the government tell us life is wonderful here, but it isn't. I have to work for 2 weeks to earn enough to buy a skirt. We cannot get decent food. If we criticize bread in a bakery, we get arrested. You can't say anything critical in this country. At the moment, we are helpless, because Shkodra is full of soldiers. People want to escape, but many have been killed trying. We are afraid, and I pray every day that we can bring about the revolution.
This is Radio Tirana.
The government broadcasts regular warnings to the people that to follow the way of the rest of Eastern Europe will result in chaos and disaster. Journalists who tried to report the protests have been arrested. Those who want to keep their jobs stick to the party line.
Of course, there has been no demonstrations in our country at all, and nothing of that kind. Those changes that happened in the Eastern European countries are not going to happen here.
Children are forced to run round the block every morning before school, and for now they must comply with this and all the authorities' demands. With opposition leaders in prison, the country is quiet. But in the long term, as more of the young begin to question the propaganda, the government will become more isolated in its determination to maintain the only Stalinist regime in Europe. Wedded to the past and weakened by a faltering economy, few of Albania's neighbors believe it can survive. Sue Lloyd-Roberts, ITN, Albania.
Now a look at how some of Thursday's papers are reporting the news. The European edition of the Wall Street Journal reports on the reasons behind the sinking of a Soviet submarine off the coast of Norway. It says thanks to Glasnost, the Soviet media have unveiled the details, errors and official bungling surrounding the accident and rescue. Japan's Asahi Shimbun reports the Tokyo Fire and Marine Insurance Company is planning to provide environmental risk consulting services to Japanese firms outside Japan. And West Germany's Die Welt says the Democratic Awakening Party leader Wolfgang Schnurr has stepped down after he admitted cooperating with East Germany's security police. And that's the world news. Goodbye.
The world news presented by Brenda Rowe. We take another break now, then the headlines, followed by a selection of stories from American television. Join us again.
As larder dealers, we've got together to bring you an amazing drive-away deal. For only £3,333, drive away this superb 1300 Riva Select. Or for just £4,444, this stylish Samara 1300 Select.
That's on the road.
It's an unrepeatable offer from every larder dealer. So call in today or you'll miss out.
It's good to know that Halifax Building Society is offering special rates on mortgages of £60,000 or more.
Did you get it?
We hope that makes a lot of people a little happier.
Yahoo!
Thank you.
Hey, Thompson, do you know anything about her?
Oh, who's that, Sybil?
No, I mean her. I want to get my hair done for my party.
Oh, you mean hair? Yes, of course. Hairdressers. Hairstyle.
The Rolls.
Oh, the Rolls. No problem. Here we are. Garage services. Car.
Not a Rolls Royce, the bread roll.
Oh, sorry. Caterers. Look, there's one just round the corner. Look.
And that. Oh, Thompson, you think of everything.
Oh, that's so true, Scylla. But then, I've got a lot of answers.
Trust Thompson.
For the local answer, trust Thompson.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When I need you, I just close my eyes and I'm with
Sheba, delicious pieces of meat, chosen and prepared with tender, loving care.
It's only a heartbeat away.
Welcome back. It's 27 minutes to 6. In a minute, how the Americans have been viewing the news, but first, the morning's top stories. The Libyans say they don't rule out sabotage as the cause of a fire at a chemicals plant at Rabta. The Americans have denied any involvement, despite their accusation in the past that the factory makes chemical weapons. A spokesman wouldn't confirm reports that the country's borders had been closed because of the fire. The latest opinion polls have spelt more problems for the government. One puts Labour 25 points ahead in the mid-Staffordshire by-election. Last night, Michael Heseltine spoke in the constituency and urged all Tories to hold their nerve. Mr. Gorbachev will find out formally within the next few hours that he's been confirmed as the new executive-style president in the Soviet Union. He'll have powers never before known to a Soviet leader. The main news will be coming up at about 5:45. Now I'll look at the day's events as seen on American television, with our selection from the Cable News Network.
The families of students murdered and raped on college campuses converged on Capitol Hill today. One man said he was there to dispel what he called the medieval myth that college campuses that look safe are safe. As CNN's Pam Olson reports, the families also want universities to be forced to publicize their campus crime statistics.
Dana Getzinger's life as a student at the University of Georgia was an idyllic fantasy until she was awakened one night by an intruder.
He attempted by thrusting a pillow over my face and trying to suffocate me. When he was unsuccessful at doing this, he plunged a knife into the base of my heart.
Howard Cleary's 19-year-old daughter Jenny was an undergraduate at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania.
Jeannie was raped, sodomized, her neck cut,
and she was strangled to death by Joseph Henry.
Both Dana and Jenny were attacked by fellow students. And according to a recent survey, most campus crime is committed by students, not outside visitors. Perpetrators tend to be white males, 19 or younger, who live on campus and belong to fraternities or an athletic team. They tend to drink more than the average student. But these parents and survivors say you won't find such information in cheery college recruitment brochures. Serious campus crime is getting a serious look from Congress, which is considering a measure to force colleges to reveal crime statistics. Mrs. George Niesvan's daughter was murdered 7 years ago. She says students may not know enough to protect themselves.
They must ask hard questions and not simply rely on the self-serving platitudes of college brochures.
Experts believe the campus crime rate is about 5% worse than the national average. But according to the House panel which investigated the problem, most universities don't want to talk about it for fear of losing alumni and financial support.
That's my understanding, that we invited a number of college presidents here today, and part of the problem is they declined to come.
2 did show up. They agree that more must be done to enhance personal safety, but they also warn.
We cannot tell you that we can guarantee security 100% of the time for every person. We cannot.
But parents say it is their tuition dollars which have paid for security systems to protect athletic stadiums and computers. They now say they want those same kinds of systems to protect their children. Pam Olson, CNN, Washington.
Across the plains and Midwest of the United States tonight, homes are flattened, cars are crushed, and residents are recovering after more than 70 tornadoes touched down in the region. Governor of Kansas declared 8 counties disaster areas today. Heston was the hardest hit. 2 people living near that town were killed. About 100 homes were damaged or destroyed. An unusually slow-moving twister struck Heston, Kansas last night, churning across the countryside for 2.5 hours. One resident says the tornado sounded like a big grinder, grinding things up. In addition to tornadoes, parts of Texas were hammered by heavy rains. In the Dallas area, more than 4 inches of rain fell in some spots, causing flooding. Heavy rains and flooding also is a problem in parts of Missouri, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Illinois. October's earthquake in Northern California might only have been a dress rehearsal for what experts say will be a strong quake hitting the Bay Area sometime within the next 30 years. As CNN's Don Knapp reports, new data shows a second fault in the Bay Area. The Hayward Fault is slipping fast, and the faster it slips, the sooner and stronger the quake.
Before October's earthquake, scientists had been looking at 2 stretches of faults likely to produce an earthquake. One, the San Andreas, that actually did rupture and caused the quake, and 2, the Hayward Fault. In fact, the Hayward Fault, which runs along the eastern side of San Francisco Bay, has produced many obvious indications of its activity.
This is evidence of the fact that Cal Stadium here on the Cal campus is being torn apart due to fault creep.
Ed Bortugno is staff geologist at the Bay Area Earthquake Preparedness Project. An earthquake the size of October's on the Hayward Fault, he says, would be many times more destructive.
We're on top of it here. It's right in our backyards. There's about 1 million people living along the length of the Hayward Fault, and I think that's what worries me. You talk about lifelines, that is highways, airports, gas lines, water lines, electricity. How do we get these things back online when we are reasonably sure that they're going to be damaged and damaged severely?
Heavily developed residential areas cover the East Bay Hills overlooking San Francisco Bay. The hills themselves were pushed up by fault action over the ages. Geologists say that Lake Temescal below us here is a sag pond created by the Hayward Fault, and that Highway 13 behind me follows a fault line through the East Bay Hills. But while everyone here knows about the Hayward Fault, a new study indicates the fault is slipping much faster than anyone expected.
What you're looking at used to be a nice straight curve, and it's not straight anymore. That's the main trace of the Hayward Fault there.
USGS physicist Jim Leoncamper has been re-examining Hayward Fault movement or creep in the South Bay area. Here, misaligned curves, broken driveways, and cracks in the pavement reveal the Hayward Fault's high rate of movement.
There are very long patches of the Hayward Fault that are entirely locked in. They're probably building strain at a rate something like 9 millimeters a year.
Leoncamper calculates that pressure is building on the Hayward Fault much faster than previously realized. And while he can't say exactly what that means, other scientists say a significant earthquake is now much more likely in this heavily populated area. Don Knapp, CNN, Oakland, California.
Oliver North today ended 4 days of testifying in the Iran-Contra trial of his former boss, John Poindexter. North admitted Poindexter was at the center of all aspects of the Reagan administration's worst scandal. North says the former national security advisor was one of the leaders in the arms for hostages deal, and Poindexter tried to cover it up. Now exit Ollie North and enter the second witness, Fawn Hall, North's former secretary. Like North, she is testifying under immunity from prosecution. Poindexter is charged with 5 felony counts, including lying to Congress and obstructing the investigation of the scandal.
Washington Mayor Marion Barry says he wants his privacy. He's urging Washington's aggressive media to grant him that request. Members of Washington's press corps say Barry is asking a lot. He is, however, back in D.C. and running the city after taking 7 weeks off to treat his substance abuse problem. CNN's David French has more on the story.
Mayor Marion Barry returned, promising to finish his 3rd term and not ruling out a 4th. As he seeks to overcome admitted alcohol and prescription drug abuse and faces a court battle over alleged cocaine use and perjury, his life has become a salacious soap opera on the local nightly news.
D.C. Mayor Marion Barry is back in town.
2 months after his arrest, Mayor Barry today... His Honor has completed his substance abuse treatment.
The mayor went on live TV.
The members of the media, let me urge you, please, to respect my privacy and the privacy of other recovering people.
The news director at the NBC-owned local station, which has been out front on the story, says the mayor will get privacy on his medical treatment, but no more than that.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure the mayor can have it both ways. He's still the chief elected official of the city. He's still the mayor. He's still conducting city business. And in that capacity, we have an obligation and a right to cover him.
Professional media watchdogs agree.
The mayor ought to remember that Harry Truman once said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And the mayor is very much in the kitchen.
In a big story like this, reputations are made, reputations are cemented, reputations are unmade, and everybody feels they have to be out there using everything they have.
Irvine charges Mayor Barry may be getting softer treatment than he deserves.
A white politician in the same position as Mayor Barry would probably have been hounded a great deal more than the mayor has been hounded, and probably by this time would have had to resign.
But perceptions among the black majority population of Washington are different.
I think that they forget that that white politicians like Gary Hart were pursued every bit as vigorously. So I don't see a racial dynamic at work. I see a real competitive dynamic at work.
If so, the mayor will have little of the privacy he says he wants. But on the other hand, he's gone on live TV several times already, and he's been back less than 2 days. David French, CNN, Washington.
Our selection of reports from American television. Now the time is 17 minutes to 6, and the main news this morning. The Americans have denied any involvement with a fire which damaged a Libyan chemicals plant. It's not clear whether the plant has been destroyed. The Libyans say the factory may have been sabotaged by the US or the Israelis. The factory is in Rabta, 50 miles south of the capital. The State Department in Washington say the plant was being used to make chemical weapons.
President Bush said the United States had absolutely not been involved in the fire at the Libyan plant, which he has long claimed is being used to make deadly chemical weapons. Only last week, the White House repeated that charge, saying that weapons production had recently resumed and refusing to rule out military action to destroy it. There was no immediate evidence to show whether yesterday's massive fire at the Rabta plant was the result of an accident or sabotage, but the facility has a history of breakdowns. The most serious was in 1988, when production came to a halt shortly after the United States first charged that mustard gas and nerve gas were being produced there. Ironically, no American spy satellite was in a position to find out what was going on, and with their fleet of Blackbird spy planes mothballed by budget cuts, the US was forced to rely on ground-based intelligence for information. Colonel Gaddafi has always insisted the plant makes only pharmaceuticals. Few believe this, and the notion of the eccentric Libyan leader passing out chemical weapons to terrorists had caused widespread alarm. Despite those White House denials, a Libyan government spokesman said that the fire, which had completely destroyed the factory, was in fact the work of the Americans, or failing that, the Israelis. Whatever the cause, it now seems that Colonel Gaddafi's chemical weapons production program has received a major setback. 2 new polls give little comfort to the government, already shaken by poll tax protests.
One poll gives Labour their biggest lead for nearly 20 years. The latest findings come after the Tories' first defeat in the Commons since the last election.
With the government already on the defensive over the poll tax, the events of the past few days have brought more trouble. On Tuesday night, the Tories suffered their first Commons defeat since the last general election.
253.
Labour says the government is visibly disintegrating.
Backbenchers were openly arguing with cabinet ministers on the floor of the House of Commons in between the votes. Scenes of a government which is in absolute disarray, in absolute turmoil. A government which I believe is in a near to terminal state. All the signs are there, and it would be quite astonishing and historically unprecedented if they were able to recover.
With senior Tory politicians campaigning in mid-Staffordshire, the by-election just a week away, two new polls have further damaged Conservative hopes of retaining the seat. One of the polls gives Labour nationally its biggest lead for nearly 20 years, with the Conservatives at 31% and Labour 21 points ahead on 52%. And a poll in this morning's Daily Mail, concentrating on the mid-Staffordshire constituency, has Labour in what it describes as a shock lead. Campaigning in the seat last night, Michael Heseltine tried to calm jitters.
Government is not easy. It is a lonely place to be. You only get the difficult decisions. Nor is it a process where everything always goes right. Sometimes things go wrong.
Despite the calls by senior ministers for calm, there's no disguising Tory fears that this could be more than just short-term unpopularity.
The Soviet Parliament has begun voting on whether to give President Gorbachev the extra powers he says he needs to steer the country out of social and economic chaos. His critics have accused him of using steamroller tactics to force the measures through Parliament. Some said he had brought the country to the brink of collapse, comparing his style to a driver putting his foot on the brake and the accelerator at the same time. Two game park wardens have been arrested in Kenya following an investigation by Scotland Yard detectives into the murder of the British woman Julie Ward. They were invited to take over the inquiry by Kenya's president. Police believe Miss Ward was held captive for some days before being killed during her visit to the Masai Mara Game Reserve. She disappeared in September 1988 while on safari. At first it was claimed she'd been eaten by wild animals. Her father John led a long campaign to prove the truth of his daughter's death. The Iraqi leader says he's not afraid of what Britain may do over the death sentence passed on the Observer journalist Farzad Bazoft. President Hussein says Iraqis are their own masters. Earlier, Britain was told a proposed visit by Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd would not be welcome.
News that the Foreign Secretary would not be a welcome visitor to Baghdad came as the Iraqi embassy in London faced yet another delegation calling for a lifting of the death sentence on Farzad Bazoft. Media trades unionists and human rights activists mounted a picket outside while a representative was received by the ambassador. Mr. Hurd had proposed visiting Baghdad on his way to a conference in Oman next weekend. Iraq's President Saddam Hussein has a reputation for stubbornness in the face of outside efforts to influence him. The message from Baghdad seems to be back off Britain or else, but British officials in Iraq are still pressing for two things.
Reply to the Prime Minister's letter and consular access. But no way are we going to let up, of course.
Farzad Bazoft worked for The Observer. His editor now thinks it's time to cool the media campaign.
We don't want to put more pressure than is necessary on Baghdad. They know what we think. They know what the world thinks now, and we have to allow them time to decide what they think is right.
So diplomatic pressure will continue, but subtly.
Neil Kinnock will hold formal talks with Nelson Mandela today. The two met in Stockholm yesterday. The Labour leader says he's committed to giving any support needed to bring about a complete end to apartheid. Mr. Mandela is on his first trip outside Southern Africa since being freed from detention. The rail unions have rejected an 8% pay deal put at talks in London. They say they want an increase of at least 10%. Last summer, British Rail awarded an 8.8% rise after a series of strikes.
The memory of last summer's grief and distress still fresh, the rail unions warned passengers they could well face more strikes over pay. British Rail offered 8% and a review of hours worked. The drivers' leader was not impressed.
Garbage.
They've offered us 8%, you quite rightly say. They're talking about restructuring exercises, and I certainly would be recommending to my executive committee that it's unacceptable.
The NUR wants 10% and warned there could be industrial action.
So that, again, is not meant to be a threat at all, but it's merely a reality. If that's where we have to go, so be it.
British Rail, though, said it was a realistic offer.
We believe it goes quite a long way towards meeting the points that the unions have made, and we hope they'll take it seriously and come back to us quickly so that we can get a settlement without disruption.
BR is also under attack for overcrowding and delayed investments.
The quick thinking of a London tube driver stopped a collision involving 800 passengers. A train went the wrong way on the track during the rush hour. The driver of another train saw it coming towards him, but managed to short-circuit the power supply. London Underground say it happened because of a problem in the signalling system.
It was in this stretch of tunnel in Monday evening's rush hour that a major underground disaster so nearly happened. The incident took place on the Piccadilly line at King's Cross. A train heading west was ordered to turn back to its starting point at Cockfosters. The passengers left. The driver should have continued west to the next set of points and then back eastwards. Instead, he walked along to the cab at the other end of a train and drove back up the same line. The driver of another westbound train waiting in the tunnel suddenly saw the headlights of the first train coming towards him. He reached out to the wiring on the tunnel walls and pulled two wires together, causing a short circuit to cut the power supply. The approaching train stopped just 400 feet from him and his 800 passengers.
I spoke on the radio to the control saying that I'd discharged the current because the train was coming towards me. And obviously the passengers, I think, in the first car must have heard this, because the next thing I heard was a door slamming between the carriages, and I looked back and the first car was empty. They'd all scarpered. Well, I can't blame them.
A similar incident happened 2 years ago, producing a recommendation that red lights should be installed to prevent drivers going the wrong way.
Did not implement that through to a conclusion. That was a fault on our part. We accept that.
Within a week, red lights will be installed at 50 locations. The driver who went the wrong way has been suspended.
The story of John Robson features prominently in the morning newspapers. A hero is how the Daily Star portrays him alongside a colour photograph. Elsewhere, in The Guardian, for instance, the government's problems are still uppermost. It quotes a poll saying half the people they spoke to want the Prime Minister to step down now. The Express claims an exclusive, saying Mrs Thatcher has agreed to join the exchange rate mechanism next year. An uncertain day's trading saw the Financial Times rise a mere 1.6 points to 2226.1. New York was busier, the Dow Jones closing up 13.29 at 2687.84. A few moments ago in Tokyo, the Nikkei Dow was standing up 204.40 points at 32,556.53. Doctors have been told by the British Medical Council that they can help childless couples have babies using surrogate mothers. After an inquiry lasting almost 2 years, the BMA has drawn up strict guidelines.
Beverly Ashmore was pregnant for 5 months. Then she found she had cancer, lost the child and had a hysterectomy, leaving her infertile. But she and her husband could still have their genetic child because a friend offered to act as a surrogate. Today's BMA guidelines, however, disqualify friends from acting as surrogates.
Totally unrealistic. My friend offered to do it for me because she's emotionally involved, understands the situation, understands our feelings, our desires to have a child, and to expect a surrogate, a total stranger, to do it without payment, without having any family involvement is impossible to imagine.
Some doctors said they were still unsure of their legal position under the law that bans commercial surrogacy.
The main worry that we all have is that you might do something in good faith, but really is it fair to put either the couples or the doctors under potential prosecution?
Whatever the BMA's recommendations, legal uncertainties and the risks involved will still deter many doctors from surrogacy.
Manchester has launched its bid to stage the 1996 Olympics, revealing plans that will cost £3.5 billion. It's competing with other cities, including Athens.
Manchester is planning a 1,000-acre Olympic centre and 24 other venues in its bid to host the Olympic Games. It's over 40 years since Britain last hosted the Olympics in London back in 1948. This time, apart from Manchester, Athens, Atlanta, Belgrade, Toronto and Melbourne are also bidding to stage the Games. Athens, in this Olympic centenary year, appears to be the clear favourite. The Greeks are selling their challenge hard. But the organisers of the British bid remain undaunted by Manchester's status of rank outsider.
I don't think sentiment and history alone will get anybody the Games. I think they will have to fight on the same terms as everybody else. Who can run the Games best, who's got the capability, who's got the facilities, who's got the infrastructures to support the Games.
Los Angeles in 1984 managed to make a profit from the Olympics of more than £150 million, but Montreal will still be paying off its debts in 1995, nearly 20 years after the city hosted the Games. Manchester's confident that the 96 Olympics will make money. An area around the Manchester Ship Canal will be transformed, and the city hopes to make a profit of £2 billion.
And that's the news so far this morning. We're back at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. Until then, goodbye.
Baguettes, is it, Monsieur Neville? Very continental. Suppose the wife's taken up another cookery course? No, I have. Oh, and then what's in the sawney, Jacques?
Oh, just some succulent, moist, tender roast beef, gently cooked with a deliciously aromatic whiskey sauce on a bed of crisp marsh, too.
Is that nouvelle cuisine, like?
Oh, Neville cuisine? No, leftovers.
You can't do better than beef.
The new four-wheel steer Honda Accord is arguably the world's most agile car. Small wonder then that it should appeal to the world's most agile minds. New Accord, agile power, engineered by Honda.
Call Chatback on 0898 228 333 and make new friends all over the UK. Just dial 0898 228 333.
Right then, I want all this lot delivered. To all these places.
Yeah.
By then.
By then?
Uh-huh. And by then.
Now there are two kinds of businesses in Britain.
And you can deliver to all 10,000 addresses tomorrow. Aye. Right, these are going off. Before these go off,
Next month. Don't worry, I'm working on it. Hello? Hello?
Ah, right, you can do Stockholm tomorrow? Okay. Turin Tuesday, Winnipeg Wednesday. Smashing. Speak to you then.
Have I ever let you down? Well, apart from last time.
Hong Kong, Tokyo, and this one's for New York, okay?
Now there are two kinds of businesses in Britain. The ones that know about parcel force.
I'll get them there. I'll get them
And the ones that wish they did. Royal Mail Parcel Force. The power to deliver.
Worried about lingering odour? Stale smells? A bit of a pong?
Hello, good morning. You're watching Thames Television from London on Thursday the 15th of March. Our daytime entertainment starts at 9:25 this morning with the Pyramid Game, and at 9:55 you'll be able to catch up with all the latest local Thames news and weather reports. Right now, though, if we look at the Thames clock, we'll see the time is rapidly approaching 6 a.m. Time to hand over to TVAM. I'm Sally McLaren. Have a great Thursday.
Hello, good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Thursday the 15th of March. I'm Linda Mitchell, standing in for Richard Keys, and you're watching Good Morning Britain from TVAM. The top news story: 2/3 of the electorate want Mrs Thatcher to resign as Prime Minister before the next election, according to a new opinion poll which puts Labour 21 percentage points ahead of the Conservatives. Sport and Desert Orchid seems to be the nation's favourite to win the Cheltenham Gold Cup today. The weather: a cloudy start in most parts of Britain will give way to brighter spells as the day goes on. But now let's go over to Lisa Aziz for the first national and international news of the day. Good morning, Lisa.
Hello, Linda. Good morning. The news from TVAM on Thursday the 15th of March.